Hey everyone, Darren from hostelmanagement.com. I know it's been a long time since I've done a video, but I promise more content is coming your way. But in the meantime, everyone's been asking, what's happened to Rucksack Brian? When are we going to be doing Unconferences again? Well, I had an opportunity to catch up with Brian in a Zoom call, of course, and in this video we talk about hostels, the future of our industry, the future of hostelmanagement.com, what happened to my hostel in San Francisco, and my future travel plans. So stick around and we'll start it right now. Brian,
There's the man.
how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Good. So what's it like in Romania with COVID? Things pretty still shut down, or?
A lot of things are opening up, a lot more than I would have expected. They basically got to the point where they said, right, we're going to push the vaccine. We want as many people to get it as possibly can. They ended up going with vaccination marathons where they pulled all-nighters where you could basically do drive-up vaccinations, which I think is amazing. And so a lot of people are getting on board. And because of that, they said, okay, the numbers have reached a certain threshold. We feel comfortable that we're going to be better so we can open up things. So it's summer. There's business to be had, so we're going to go ahead and open. So they're including having 2 monster festivals. I still have my doubts that it's really going to happen, but we'll see. Because the number of people they can have, I think they made the law specifically for a couple of festivals at the end of the summer, where they said you can have festivals of more than 1,000 people if everyone who attends is vaccinated. You got to provide documentation that you're not likely to be contagious. Mm-hmm. And so with that, in the same law, they said around that same time, they will allow us to have groups of up to 8 people walking together on the street who are not blood related, but you can have a festival of more than 1,000. But normally we have just huge turnout for these festivals.
Transylvania Hostel's going to open soon, or?
No.
No. I thought you were saying you were going to open back up.
We have basically converted some of our dorms into private apartments, and other parts of the hostel were already private apartments that normally we would use to basically have as a second stream of income. Since we shut down, for a long time we did nothing. We were lucky that a few of our tenants had stayed, and so throughout the pandemic we had a couple of the apartments already rented, and they just decided to stick around. I said, where am I going to go? There's no point in leaving. And then now we've started putting them through Airbnb, and I'm happy. We've had quite a few long-term, 2-week, 3-week, 7-week something stays, which is fantastic. So the hostel itself with shared dormitories, I don't see happening. Certainly not this year. I'm not sure that there would be enough backpacker tourists to come and stay in dorms. Yeah. So for now, we're basically going to stick to just the private rooms and private apartments. We're not going to offer the shared facilities. We're not offering game room or common reception area. We're not offering common kitchen. We don't have any staff whatsoever. So the whole system is run with key codes.
Is that true for all hostels in Romania? Are all the hostels in Romania pretty much shut down? Have you heard other stories?
Most of the people that I've talked to have shut. Some have closed down multiple hostels. If they've had a chain, they've closed them down. A lot of people have basically put their entire hostel into storage and said, when we can, we'll reopen. We got a hostel in a box. We're ready to go for when the time comes that we can. Some hostels have tried to stay open, but we've talked to them and they've said business is just miserable. Mm-hmm. So not really worth it. I know down south, we talked to Razvan. He stayed open. He said that even during the pandemic, he was still open and still had people. There were still travelers. So fantastic for him. I'm really glad to hear that there were still people traveling, and for those who were traveling, that there was a place to go. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, it sounds the way you're running Cluj is very similar to the way I was running Pacific Tradewinds. It was all private rooms. Mm-hmm. We took a bed out of each of the dormitories and put a desk in there because we had the student homestay. We closed and sold that building. We moved some of the furnishings, the desk furnishings, over to the hostel. And it was, running a hostel with private rooms for me is just so depressing. I have this prejudice against private room dwellers. I admit it. And they're just so different in terms of what their needs are, what their demands are, and they just weren't happy at all. They're expecting a hotel room, which it was never built to be that. And so we did the self-service too. We had virtual keys so that they could check in, and it's unbelievable how many people lock themselves out of their rooms when it's private rooms. We had key boxes for like a spare key for each of the rooms, and people would lock themselves out, and then I would tell them the code to get the key out, and then they would not return that key, and it was just like, drove me nuts. Anyway, May 28th, I actually sold Pacific Tradewinds Hostel on May 28th of this year.
I saw that you were on the market and you were looking to sell. So you actually let it go.
I let it go, and it's so good now. So it was sold to ITH Hostels. They actually operate 5 hostels in Southern California. This is their first hostel in Northern California in San Francisco. In the absence of any legislation that tells them that they can't operate, they're operating as a hostel. I mean, they're doing as many protocols as they can. It's by no means full, but the demand has shown itself to be there a little bit. And it's different, though. We're not getting as many international travelers, obviously. We're starting to see a lot more Americans staying in hostels, trying out hostels, usually by way of Airbnb. They're just on a budget, and they're like, oh, maybe this is my time to try a hostel. And they're actually getting really good reviews. People are loving the hostel. I'm so very happy that after 29 years, I almost made it to 30. But the pandemic happened, and it's like, okay, I'll just let it go now. So, which is really nice. Now I'm kind of shifting gears. I'm actually wanting to do a little bit of road tripping in the U.S. and actually traveling around, just talking to other hostel owners and managers, not only about the pandemic, but also like, how do you run your hostel? What's amazing about your hostel? It's kind of like Hostel Road Trip Podcast, but they're so much better at it than I intend to be. I just want to like have some informal conversations, break out a beer, and video it. And maybe something really spectacular happens out of the conversation, and we get into something that we're both passionate about the industry, and then that'll actually make it onto hostel management. Other times it'll just be a conversation, and the footage will be on the cutting room floor. So eventually I hope I can be back in Europe again and seeing hostels, but like you said, it may be a year or so before anything's back to any kind of normalcy.
I don't know how much of the industry that we knew is still there. On the other hand, I feel like there's going to be, once things start to come back, a huge opportunity for either people who are experienced in hostels that have had to shut down to come back and get a fresh start, or for new people who are passionate about it to come in and start up from the beginning. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the entire industry changes and develops at that point, because I do think it'll be a different flavor of hostels.
Yep.
I think that actually small hostels will have a big advantage at that point. With a big hostel, there's just such a huge investment that goes into it, and you need to know that the market's going to be there. With a small hostel, you can test the waters, you can test things out, you can expand and grow over time. So for somebody new coming into the industry, that's an opportunity. Or for somebody that's getting back into it, they know exactly where their sweet spot is that they like. It's going to be a lot of good things starting, I think, once travel starts up again. Huge opportunity for people that are passionate about hostels. And I'm excited about that, to see what the industry will become at that point.
I've really realized that where I'm most passionate about is those small hostels that have community. They're not just a cheap place to stay. And it's somebody who's either passionate about creating community, or they're passionate about their destination, whether it be a surf town or a farm town. They really want to share their piece of the world with the rest of the world. And those are generally where the friendships really happen. So I've kind of fallen out of touch of where all the hostels are, even in the U.S. So that's one of the reasons I just want to go travel and find them. But I said early in the pandemic that small hostels have an advantage because a lot of the things that they need to survive, electricity, shelter, food, it's the same things that their guests need. So they can really kind of hunker down, and it's their home for a while. Sometimes they get a job on the outside, and they can still continue to pay the bills. And so that was one of the big reasons that I also decided that Pacific Tradewinds really needed to be an owner-operator, someone who could actually live on site, manage that community, smell smoke before there's fire, because anytime you're dealing with different personalities, you have to kind of finesse and mediate things. So I think small hostels do that. I don't know if you heard USA Hostels closed all of their hostels at the beginning of the pandemic. Permanently.
No, I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
Completely shut it all down.
Completely shut it all down. So David Reuter was the owner, and I guess he made that decision. Bridget Nichols, who used to be like a regional manager for USA Hostels, same son from Canada, now has a hostel in San Francisco, and she's the general manager there. And I put out the word to Bridget to say, hey, I want to come by and say hello. I just want to see the hostel. There's a few hostels in San Francisco I've never seen. Music City Hostel. I'm hoping I get to see them at some point just to see what they're doing. So there's a whole bunch of hostels all over the U.S. that are really kind of in my back door. So I'm going to be driving to see hostels.
I wish I could do that now. That's exactly what I used to do all over Europe in particular, but anywhere that I would go, I always did hostel tourism. Any city I went to, the first thing I would do, track down all the hostels, go and visit them. I love hostel people in general, so I'm happy to stop in, see a hostel, talk to whoever might be there that's passionate about what they're doing. Yeah. But it is interesting when you can talk to everybody up the ladder, from the receptionist that's greeting you, smiling at the door, all the way up to the owners and the folks that are passing through doing their jobs, doing some cleaning. Everything else is, I'm thrilled. I just like to be in that environment.
I'm most excited about being able to actually get back into hostel management because I really do feel like the site has languished. I'll admit that publicly. You know, everything's kind of moved to social media and the forums. I think when Josh built hostel management, the internet was in the era of the forums, and everyone was like getting there and contributing their knowledge and sharing information. And now we spent so much time dealing with spammers and scammers. I have somebody in India who I employ. Every day he goes in and he's just taking off all of the spam posts. It drives me crazy. So I have some ideas, some ways to re-engage the community of hostel owners and managers. And of course, the first of it is just creating content that they're interested in.
Right.
Yeah, talking to people. So I'll have a lot more time for that. So I'm looking forward to that. Question I get all the time is, when are you going to start doing unconferences again? And I'm like, well, there's COVID, and I also happen to know the guy who's amazing at doing unconferences is a father now, and I've been there, done that. My daughter's just about to go to college, so I'm at the light at the end of the tunnel.
It's amazing that she's about to go to college now. I can't believe that.
Yeah, but I know what you're in. It is a full-time job. Parenthood is a full-time job, and then some.
Yeah.
So.
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's definitely a challenge. And it's one of those that I felt like there would be time for things, but there's not. The only time we have for anything is when the kids nap. I would love to get the unconferences going again because I so miss the people, the interaction, the people who share my obsession. I want to be surrounded by hostel professionals.
Getting back to what you were saying about like the industry, I think when we come out of COVID, I think it's going to look very different than what you and I knew. An interesting thing on hostel management, obviously when the pandemic happened, every hostel around the world were like, they were tightening their belts and they had to cut expenses enormously. And a lot of our members on hostel management dropped their subscriptions, and we can't fault them for that. There was no ill will. And then sometimes the subscription would go through, and then they would email us and say, I forgot about that. Can you refund it? And we would always refund it. The interesting thing, though, is that we're starting to get we have been all the way through, we would get these newcomers. So there's like people who were wanting to get access to like the Hostel Professionals Library. I think that was one of the reasons during the pandemic that they were actually rejoining. And it was like these aspiring hostel owners. And I was still doing the hostel, so I couldn't really reach out to people to say, hey, who are you and what hostel do you run or what hostel do you aspire to run? That's one of the things I'm hoping to do now. And then we're now starting to get more memberships because hostels in various parts of the world are starting to get back up, but they have a shortage of staff. And so they're struggling to try and find staff. And I'm actually hoping to meet with a hostel here in the future that she was like, I need staff, but I also really can't afford a membership. And I was like, let's just get into a video call, and I want to find out what's going on in Italy and Spain. I just want to have a conversation, like you said, with another hostel owner, and then I'll give you a free membership so that you can post a job. So I'm hoping to start doing some of that. But it's interesting how the membership has totally cycled. Like there's some people who stayed through us the whole way through, and they're just like, yeah, hostel management really means a lot to us, but a whole bunch of people dropped off and a whole bunch of new people came on. So like if we did an unconference, it'd be interesting to see who comes.
Right. I want an unconference. I want to be able to go and do that and put it together. I need to find the right host, and I need to make sure that it's safe enough for us to be there.
Well, in the meantime, before we can get back to having unconferences, my intent, because I don't feel like I can do what you do, my intent is to have just hostel meetups. If I am in a place where there's 3 or 4 hostel owners and staff who could come together and we can go to a beer garden during COVID, maybe we'll be outside having a beer outside, and it'll just be a short, like, afternoon type thing.
Yeah, just an evening gathering.
Yeah, just to be able to actually get together back with people again. And like you said, and I've tried to explain this to other people, the people who run hostels are really interesting people. I mean, they're travelers themselves. They've had amazing adventures. They're risk takers because they're starting a hostel business. So I just love talking to those people. So they're like, it's my tribe. So
that's exactly it.
Yeah, and to be able to maybe have some meetups where if we can identify some aspiring hostel owners and bring them in.
I think it'd be interesting for you if you're doing little meetups, especially because with the industry, as people disappear here in Cluj, people had to change up their business. They might still be around. Maybe they're waiting. Maybe they're not. I don't know what the plans are for everybody. And so if somebody turned up and called everybody, said, hey, I'm in town, you guys want to get together, that might be really interesting. I mean, for us, it certainly would to get together and say, so how did you weather the storm and what are your plans now? Are you going to open back up? Or did you decide, you know what, we've managed this much time, I've had extra time to do something else, I'm going to stick with it because it's working. There may be people that have completely changed their model. Or it may be, no, I'm very much passionate about the hostel. I want it back, and as soon as I can, I will. And it would be really interesting for them, especially within the local market, to get back together and have those conversations. And they may not ask each other that question, but you certainly would.
Yes.
I think people will be interested to know, what's going on? What's the market in another state, another city, another country, another whatever? Because so much of us, even if the market's totally different, the business is not.
Yeah.
And so
people want to see what other hostels are doing. If hostels that are open, how are they keeping their guests safe? Are they've started now with kind of curtains. I've heard of curtains. I've heard of plastic curtains in dormitories where they've minimized the number of people. I've thought about, I haven't heard of anyone, but more of the pod style, the capsule hotel where everyone has their individual air there. I don't know. Is that going to happen in our industry? I don't know.
Yeah, and even if people aren't getting brand new ideas to say, oh, that's what I need to do to fix it, if every conversation you have is everybody saying, yep, that's what I'm doing, okay, then everybody watching says, right, I'm on par, I'm up to speed here. Nobody's come up with something that's way beyond what I'm able to do. Okay, I'm okay.
Yeah.
It'll definitely be interesting. I think there will be a lot of people that are going to look at that, and especially people trying to get into the industry. I mean, that now's a great time to be making the plans, and I think they'll be very interested in seeing what's everybody doing now. What is the current state of the hostel industry, because it is vastly different than it was a year ago.
Really was. Yeah, exactly. This has been really great, like having a conversation with you, and thank you so much for letting me record it. I think people are really going to enjoy hearing like what's happened, where's hostel management come from, where's it going, and it's an ongoing discussion. So we'll keep having the conversation with lots of hostel owners, and that my goal is just to get people re-engaged in the hostel management community, the community of hostel owners and managers. So thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.